My name is Laura and you are watching The Paranormal Scholar, and today we're going to be examining a case of witchcraft and wrath, a series of diabolical accusations that embroiled an entire village, and ultimately ended in the execution of 3. In November 1589, a 9-year-old Jane Throckmorton made a terrible accusation. Her neighbour, an elderly lady called Alice Samuel, was a witch, and was responsible for the hideous physical ailments which she and her 4 sisters suffered. By April 1593, Samuel was said to have supernaturally assaulted several others, and even caused the demise of a lady, resulting in the English village of Warboys turning against her and her entire family. Today, the Witches of Warboys is a little remembered case of witchcraft, but most certainly one of the most historically important. Before we begin, I'd like to take a quick moment to mention membership to my Quill and Ink Society. At Paranormal Scholar HQ, it is our favourite time of year, and so we're busy preparing Halloween card shipments for our beloved Patreon members. So if you are a member, please make sure your postal address is up to date. And if you would like to receive a member-exclusive Halloween card signed by yours truly, as well as gain access to many other wonderful membership benefits, head to the description box and click the link through to my Patreon page. Thank you. The village of Warboys is located in the historic county of Huntingdonshire, England, and in the late 16th century, its residents welcomed a new family, the Throckmortons. The family was headed by a wealthy squire by the name of Robert, who was known to be connected to one of the wealthiest commoners in England at the time, Sir Henry Cromwell, the grandfather of the infamous Oliver. And so the Throckmortons moved to the village and soon established a household which kept many in its employ, including several maidservants who were responsible for helping to administer the household and care for Robert and his wife's 6 daughters. All seemed to be going well until, on the 10th of November 1589, Robert's 9-year-old daughter Jane all of a sudden fell into a strange kind of sickness. After a fit of sneezes that lasted up to half an hour, she would faint and fall into a trance. Unmoving, her body would then swell in size before her terrified family's eyes. She would also heave up her belly, being unable to keep any manner of food down for very long. Sometimes she would shake one leg and no other part of her. At other times it would be one of her arms, then the other, and even her head. It was a diverse illness, of which there seemed to have been no cause. Continuing for several days, members of her family kept vigil at Jane's bedside. Concerned neighbours also flocked to the sick little girl, eager to help in any way that they could. One such neighbour was Alice Samuel, an elderly woman who dwelled in the next house on the north side. Jane's mother and grandmother in the room with her, Mother Samuel sat in the corner of the parlour, beside the fire and close to the child as she was held in her mother's arms. According to an anonymous pamphlet published at the time of the happenings, Samuel had only been in the room a short while when the child's affliction worsened. Jane began to cry and, calling for her grandmother, pointed to the old woman sitting beside the fire. "Grandmother," Jane is recorded as having said, "look where the old witch sits." Jane, despite her sickly condition, was immediately rebuked by her mother. Mother Samuel had come to visit her out of concern, and it was rude to speak of her in such a manner. But still Jane cried. "Did you ever see one more like a witch than she?" She is said to have wept as her mother tried to soothe her. Mother Samuel said nothing, and only watched on as Mrs. Throckmorton closed the curtains and arranged her child in bed, encouraging her to sleep away the sickness. In the days which followed, Jane is said to have worsened. Her parents, understandably concerned, arranged for a sample of the girl's urine to be sent to a man well known to be excellently skillful, a Cambridge physician called Dr. Barrow. He determined, based on his analysis, that there was no obvious cause of the sickness, but that the girl might be troubled with worms. He sent medicine accordingly, and Robert and his wife administered it to their child, hoping that she would be cured. She wasn't, and indeed Jane's illness only intensified. Again they sent more urine, and again Dr. Barrow sent medicine. These prescriptions, however, did no more than the first, and so, after further examinations, the doctor concluded that he could provide no medical explanation. Jane's illness was not something he had ever encountered before. A second expert's opinion was likewise requested. He, like Dr. Barrow, at first suggested Jane might be suffering from worms and prescribed the same medicine. The Throckmortons, however, by now knew this was not the case and were becoming increasingly concerned. Turning to God, they prayed for relief for their child. As it was, they received the opposite. 1 month after Jane was first sick, almost to the very day and hour, 2 older daughters of the Throckmortons fell ill. 3 girls, now sick, they exhibited the same symptoms: sneezing fits, seizure-like episodes, and fainting. They were also reported to have been unified in their accusations. Alice Samuel, the girls said, was the cause of their suffering. "It is she," the girls claimed, "that has bewitched us." And the old woman would kill them, they warned, if she were allowed to continue with her witchcraft. Far from being dismissed like Jane's original outburst a month before, the daughters' accusations rooted themselves in the mind of Robert Throckmorton. The medicine had not worked. Neither had his and his wife's prayers. The sickness was spreading, and one of the only visible consistencies was the presence of his neighbour, Alice Samuel, at his children's bedsides. Consulting Dr. Barrow again, Robert was told that the malice of some witches was suspected to have afflicted children in other cases, and so sorcery was thought to be to blame. Before too long, a 4th sister, younger than the others, also fell ill. Like her siblings, she too cried out against Alice Samuel. Soon after that, Joan, the eldest of the Throckmorton girls at the age of 15, succumbed as well. According to the contemporary pamphlet, she was even more grievously tormented than the others, sneezing, screeching, groaning, unable to overcome that which tormented her. It was even written that the malevolent force which haunted the household would bounce up her body with such violence that she had to be held down in her bed so as to stop her from being hurt further. Likewise, she had to be held in her chair lest it break under the force of the inexplicable convulsions which raged across her entire body. Horrifyingly, such fits were described as having lasted anything from 1 to 2 hours to the entire day. Robert and his wife did not know what to do. They were helpless and could only hold their girls as they were deprived of all use of their senses. The only thing which they were able to do in the midst of it all being cry that it was Mother Samuel who had done this to them. After some time the case evolved and a strange development grew into being. Joan, the eldest of the girls to have fallen ill, claimed that she could hear the evil spirit of Mother Samuel's conjuration in her ears. Not merely that, it whispered secrets to her, stating that, one way or another, 12 in the Throckmorton household would be bewitched. The spirit, she claimed, then named the 12, she and her 4 sisters and 7 maidservants. And so it was, a short time afterwards, the illness spread again, with 7 of the women who worked in the house falling ill alongside the daughters. All of the afflicted, in their various states of misery, cried out against Alice Samuel. "She will kill us all if you let her alone," they are recorded as having said. Peculiarly, when the tormented maidservants left the household, they immediately recovered, their replacements, upon entering, being suddenly stricken by the same agonies. And so this strange state of affairs continued for the next 2 years. But what of Alice Samuel? Reading contemporary accounts from the time, it seems as though the elderly neighbour of the Throckmortons was just as concerned about the girls' well-being as their parents. Hardly a typical malevolent witch of dark fairy tales, she is recorded as having declared that she would venture her life in water up to her chin and lose some part of her best blood to do them any good. In the early days of their illness, she was also known to visit the house in a show of support to the girl's mother. And yet, as their illness worsened and spread, she started to stay away, fearing that the accusations of witchcraft would bring harm to her. All the while, others in the local community, including Robert Throckmorton's brother-in-law, Gilbert Pickering, sought to convince her that should her witchcraft indeed be responsible for the children's suffering, it might be amended. On the 13th of February, Pickering, along with several others, went to the Samuels' house and asked the old woman to come with them. She resisted, but they compelled her. At the time, the children were not ill, and they wanted to see if the woman's presence at the Throckmorton house would have any influence. And certainly, it is said that no sooner had Mother Samuel entered the hall, 3 of the children fell down on the ground, strangely tormented. One of the daughters' bodies was described as having swelled to such a degree that the men struggled to carry her to her bed. The little girl's belly was supposedly far bigger than any woman with child ready to be delivered, and she acted as though she was blind. By supper, Mother Samuel having been removed from the house, the children had recovered, and so it seemed to all those involved that the accusations were correct. Alice Samuel was to blame. The case thereafter gained more and more attention, including that of the Cromwell family, who were friends of the Throckmortons. On one occasion, Lady Susan, the second wife of Sir Henry Cromwell, travelled with her daughter-in-law to visit the family. There in Warboys, she was able to observe the girl's strange sickness, and, being affected by what she saw, decided to intervene on the parents' behalf. Summoning Alice Samuel to her, Lady Cromwell is said, in a fit of emotion, to have charged the old woman with witchcraft. This Mother Samuel thoroughly denied. Still, Lady Cromwell demanded that the woman consent to be examined. Alice Samuel only continued her denial, stating that the accusations had no substance. Unable to do any more, Lady Cromwell left that same evening. Peculiarly, waking suddenly that night, she claimed to have experienced a distressing dream, in which the old woman tormented her, with her sending a cat to pluck off all the skin and flesh from her arms and body. Not long afterwards, so the pamphlet published at the time claims, the lady fell strangely sick and was ill, supposedly suffering the witch's curse, until she died just over a year later. Her death was squarely blamed on her exchange with Alice Samuel. And so, not only was the Throckmorton household in chaos, someone had been bewitched to death. It was surely then only a matter of time before the witch claimed her next victim. All those in the village, the parents, the children, their uncles, their neighbours, and others exhorted Alice Samuel to confess her witchcraft. But the old woman was firm. She would not confess that which she never did know of, nor consented to, and instead blamed the evil spirits which she claimed haunted the Throckmorton household. Regardless, she was kept under firm observation, forced to move into the Throckmortons' home, not allowed to spend time alone with the children, and suspected at all times. Then, some 3 years after the first daughter Jane fell ill, everything changed. Alice Samuel, after witnessing one of the girls suffering an especially terrible fit and fearful that the girl might die, charged the spirit that was allegedly responsible to leave the girl alone. "I charge you, spirit," she is said to have cried out, "in the name of God, that Mistress Jane never have this fit." The old woman's denial crumbled, and her command is said to have worked. Thus, it appeared to prove what the children had claimed all along, that their elderly neighbour did have control over their maladies. Terrified by the evil extent of her power, Mother Samuel subsequently confessed. Collapsing before the girl's father, she supposedly cried out, "Oh, sir, I have been the cause of all this trouble to your children," after which she claimed that she had indeed given her soul to the devil. Weeping and full of regret, the old woman is said to have begged the family, the children and their parents for forgiveness. Forgiveness, it was recorded, was given, on the condition that the children not fall ill again. And yet, within a day or two, Mother Samuel retracted her confession. Upon returning home to her husband and daughter, she once more asserted that she would deny that she was a witch, or any cause of the troubling of the Throckmortons' children. And so, believing his children to be once more in danger, Robert Throckmorton then turned to the law. With the support of the Bishop of Lincoln and the local constables, Alice Samuel was charged. Before the whole village, she confessed to being a witch, and on the 26th of December 1592, and again on the 29th, was brought before the law and examined. Under examination, Alice Samuel admitted that she had been taught witchcraft by a man that came to her house. Where he dwelt, or what his name was, she was at first unable to reveal. He was evil, that much was certain, for he taught her how to summon and control the devilish spirits which she directed at the Throckmorton family. Asked again to reveal the identity of the man, Samuel broke down and claimed that his name was Langland. He was a man who dwelt nowhere, and at that moment was supposedly on a voyage beyond the seas. In the course of the examinations, Alice's daughter Agnes was also implicated in the witchcraft by the children, although she did not confess as her mother had. And so both mother and daughter were held in the local jail. During their incarceration, it is said that one of the jailers died under mysterious circumstances. The case dragged into the new year and would not be resolved until April. By then, not merely was the daughter Agnes Samuel implicated, but John, Alice's husband, also. Throughout the trial, the girls continued to be afflicted by allegedly witchcraft-induced illnesses. These episodes and the tragic death of Lady Cromwell, as well as the damning testimonies and questionable scratch test-based evidence provided by the Throckmorton girls themselves, were taken very seriously by the court, so much so that the three Samuels, the three Witches of Warboys, were sentenced to death. According to the pamphlet published that year, the grand jury made no great delay, but found them all guilty. God would be their ultimate judge. While neither Agnes nor John ever confessed to their alleged crimes, Alice Samuel confessed everything that she was accused of, even stating that her husband could both bewitch and unwitch a person at will. Whether that was actually the case, it is of course impossible to say. Those at the time certainly believed in the guilt of the Witches of Warboys. Declaring their verdict, the justices stated that their consciences were well satisfied that the said witches were guilty and had deserved their death. There was, they believed, plenty of evidence, not least of all the witch's mark found on the body of Mother Samuel after her execution, a little lump of flesh to the length of about half an inch, something which was considered damning proof by the standards of the time. Not only that, the Throckmorton children are reported as having recovered entirely after the executions. Today, scholars look back on the case as a tragedy, a precursor to the infamous Salem witch trials of the 17th century, and indeed the closer-to-home trials of the Pendle witches in 1612, both of which relied heavily on the experiences and testimonies of young people in order to damn the accused. Whilst using young girls as key witnesses, especially in such life or death trials, may be considered strange by modern standards, it was very much the modus operandi of witchcraft trials of the early modern period. What this means, and whether or not this reflects reality, is difficult to say. Were little girls simply easy targets for genuinely diabolical witches, and thus best placed to testify against them? Or did they have a habit of twisting reality and condemning the innocent? Philip C. Ormond, in his Cambridge University Press book Demonic Possession and Exorcism in Early Modern England, certainly seems to think the latter, and draws attention to the fact that the possibility of fraud on the part of the girls was not seriously explored at the time. While doctors were involved in the Throckmorton case to assess whether or not there was a natural cause of the girls' illnesses, it was never suggested that the children could be lying. Why they would, of course, is a complex issue. By all accounts, Alice Samuels seemed just as concerned for the children's well-being as their parents. And equally, for a long time, both Robert and his wife and their daughters were willing to work with and even forgive the old woman for what they considered to be crimes. Why the children would make up such hideous accusations cannot be understood. And yet, as Ormond points out, the children acted out an available cultural script, that of possession by evil spirits. The world created by the children and endorsed by the adults was, he writes, persuasive and pervasive, so much so that eventually even Mother Samuel herself was convinced of the connection between her presence and the children's health, and confessed to having bewitched the children. A chilling and almost unbelievable notion that someone can be convinced of such. And yet, the alternate explanation in the Witches of Warboys case can be said to be equally unbelievable, that an elderly woman approaching her 80th year bewitched 5 young girls, tormented 7 others, and even killed a lady who dared to accuse her of her crimes. It is strange, certainly, and arguably having created a blueprint for future cases to follow, lingers to this day, firmly present in the very fibres of the history of witchcraft trials and the deadly witch mania which blazed across the early modern world. Thank you so much for watching, and an extra special thank you to our members, both here on YouTube and on Patreon. Your support as ever is much appreciated. If you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe for more of the paranormal. And if you cannot wait until my next video, why not watch the one suggested on screen now? Until next time.